Hello and welcome to another episode of Laying Down the Lore of the Old World, a monthly podcast in which we aim to separate our ghouls from our goblins, our snotlings from our Skaven storm fiends, and our bloodthirsters from our bloodletters, and generally ask, what's up with this Warhammer stuff? My name is Ben Barber, and I know fuck all about Warhammer. With me is my co-host Christopher Crallin Allen.
What's up?
Who also knows fuck all about Warhammer.
Yeah, true.
And my dear brother Darren.
Hello.
Who knows so much about Warhammer, it's a wonder he has time to do anything else. After gathering online to slay some vermin in the name of Sigmar, this dichotomy between our levels of understanding became clear, and this series is an attempt to address that ignorance. Stupidity.
So that's the thing now, we're doing this every episode.
I think it's already getting a bit dry.
It's already getting, yeah.
Kral, did you notice anything different about the intro?
Anything different about the intro? You added something after laying down the law. The Old World or something?
Excellent. Any idea why?
Because you believe in the superiority of Western Europe? What?
Yes, that one.
Great, well now that's clarified, we can move on. Right, Kral, you know what time it is?
Nope.
Hello, Reichland. It's time for the WhatsApp recap.
Hey!
You can't help but like cheer, can you, when you hear that? It's quite cheer-inducing. Yeah, so anyway, last episode we saw the return of Nagash, or the first of many returns by the sounds of it, 1,200 years after he was defeated by Alcadazar, and he had an epic battle with Sigmar, some dude called Sigmar? I don't know.
Never heard of him.
Put on his funky hat, his crown of sorcery, which was like a foghorn, Aruga, to, what's-his-face, to Nagash. So he went over and was like, you got my stuff. So tried to get it back, but lost epically. Took a hammer to the chest, which would floor anyone, I guess. We also traced the past of various vampires and necromancers. I'll be honest, it won't surprise you to tell you that I don't really remember any of these bits. So the creation of the Vampire Coast, I don't know. The Necromancer Van Hal and the Warpstone Shows in Sylvania. Would have thought I'd remember that, but here we are. And I kind of remember this. Rise of the Doom Lord of Middenheim, Dieter Hellschnicht.
Yeah, Dieter Hellschnicht, the Doom Lord of Middenheim, who rides a manticore.
Ah, yes, the lion with the head of a man.
Yes.
That's it. Yeah. The Doom Lord of Middenheim, also, like the Rune of Doom, sounds a bit like a wrestling person, doesn't it? And coming in with 380 pounds, the Doom Lord of Middenheim, Dieter Hellschnicht.
It's the Doomy Rune!
Oh my god! It's the Rune of Doom! It's the Rune of Doom!
God.
Anyway, finally, the birth of the Blood Dragon Vampire line, where Abrash went straight to third base with the dragon and drained it dry. Oh yeah, and Nagash came back again. And again. And again and again and again and again and again.
Well, I thought that's the fastest WhatsApp recap we've ever done.
I could do it faster. 1,200 years after being defeated by Alcadazar, Nagash returns and has an epic battle with Persical Sigmar. Once his crown back, sorcery back was vaporized by Sigmar's old mighty hammer. Whew, I could do it faster.
Okay, so it was the fastest and most legible up until that point.
Yeah.
Intelligible, I think the word
Intelligible.
is.
That's the one. Legible. Yes, I was reading what you were speaking.
Yeah. And also your waveform looked perfect.
Thanks, baby.
Oh.
I grew it myself.
Well, thanks for that, Kral, even if you didn't remember any of it. What were you doing last month? Why were you not paying attention?
Well, the weird thing is, you know...
I wasn't.
Well, surprisingly, no.
The joke's on you, Ben. I never listen.
But the other weird thing is that I've listened, because I helped do some of the editing, I've listened to that episode twice. Once for the first pass, and two to set the questions for our Chunks of Dar bonus podcast available on tier 2 patrons only. And yet I still have to rely on these WhatsApp recaps from Darren, which make no sense to me. Weird. Hey, listen, you asked me to be in this show.
So it's on you, baby.
My conscience is clear. Yeah.
What would a WhatsApp recap be if you did actually understand it? We'll never know.
Yeah, exactly.
And hopefully we'll never find out.
I hope so. Right. Okay. Well, I feel like we've suitably rinsed this intro. Dar, where are we going?
So last episode, we kind of closed out a potpourri of bloodletting and vampiric goodness, which really highlighted the shadowy nature of vampires, because they tend not to live out in the open in the old world because they get peppered, I say, with stakes and bullets and arrows and things made of wood. No, not that one, the other one. And they tend to live a very, I think, an ASMR life, really, is what they tend to. Very quiet. I'm a vampire. I'm very quiet vampire. Can I suck on your neck, please?
Stop, I'm wildly aroused.
Wildly aroused. So we touched on some necromantic goodness. We touched on some vampiric goodness, with the two biggest real events or most recent events for Warhammer Vampires being the usurpation of the Sylvanian rulership by Vlad von Carstien, who, if you'll recall, took over from the von Drac family, or of Elector Counts, really. So technically, one of the Elector Counts for the old world is now a vampire. They have the legal rights, but they can't get in because they'll be staked immediately. No one wants to be elected by a vampire.
And am I mistaken, von Carstien was actually Neferratum's ex-hubby? Or did I just completely make that up?
That is 100% true. And also, if you get his name right, I will arrange for a impromptu hand job when you least expect
Oh,
it.
the name. Yeah, I did know this. Come on, Neferratu was married to, I believe it began with A. I might be confusing that with Abarash, though.
I was going to say H.
I'm not going to get it.
Abarash. That's
No, Abarash was Abarash drank a dragon dry.
Oh, he drank a dragon dry, didn't he?
Yeah, he was like the captain of the guard or something. I can't remember the name of the old king.
Vashanesh
with a V, Ben, with a V.
Oh,
I said with an H. It did have an H in it.
Has an A in it too.
He did have an A as well, that's true.
I tell you what, this saves me from a very awkward phone call with your other half.
Yeah. I need to come to your house in the next few weeks unannounced.
Come.
I need to come in your house.
All right, guys, let's knock it up a few IQ levels. Come on.
And then we looked at the creation of the Blood Dragons, or the Ordo Draconis, which sounds very 40k, but will draw a veil. They are the kind of offspring of Abarash, who drank a dragon dry, and then whose kind of second in command, a chap called Warlock Harkon, arrived at Bloodkeep, took it over, and created then a kind of Templar order of vampire knights, referred to either directly as Blood Dragons or as Blood Knights. This was about 700 years before present, and really the vampires get their heads down again, usually into someone's neck, but not always. They kind of just pop up every now and then, sometimes in Bretonnia, as the Red Duke did when he waged his war on Aquitaine. So you had Bretonians versus undead Bretonians.
Nice.
And then ultimately they kind of really disappeared into the shadows. The last sort of major event before the turning of the millennium was Bloodkeep fell. The Empire, having enough of the Order Draconis, laid siege to their fortress and drove the Blood Dragons from their home. They splintered then into numerous smaller orders, usually all vampire knights, but not always. Sometimes they were supported by what's referred to as Black Knights, which are its skeleton cavalry, effectively. And then that really kind of died down. There was no real problems with vampires until the year 2000. Or in fact, until the turning of 1999 and 2000.
When they had to deal with the Millennium Bug.
Y2K.
Really, what we're looking at here is an event that touched on almost all factions within the old world directly. So everything that has a presence in the old world is impacted, if you'll excuse the forthcoming pun, by the events surrounding the destruction of Mordheim, which was a city on the border of Sylvania and the province to the north, which is either Talabheim or Talabekland or Ostermark. I can't recall correctly at this time.
Yeah, I always get those two mixed up myself, Darren. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. It started with the appearance of a twin-tailed comet in the skies over the fated place, which is the name of the planet of Warhammer. This was seen as a great symbol of Sigmar and Sigmar's blessing, because obviously his symbol is a twin-tailed comet. It was that twin-tailed comet that heralded his birth. So this was seen as a blessing and a symbol of the resurgence of Sigmar and the Empire. And really, it was going to be religious resurgence of worship and supremacy. For some reason, it was viewed that Mordheim was going to be the kind of epicenter of this new... I keep saying the word resurgence. I've now said it so much it sounds wrong. It's like when you two try and say behemoth.
You mean behemoth?
No, behemoth. You say potato, I hit you with a potato. Who says potato?
You, apparently.
As you're throwing it. Potato!
And then you're just standing over an unconscious person going, I feel so stupid. That was the last thing they heard me say. Potato. What has my life become?
When they wake up in hospital. Now, what's the last thing that you remember?
Potato!
Potato?
No, that can't be right. No one's foolish enough to say potato. Well, if this isn't a tangent, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I don't know where we were going with that.
So a lot of religious kind of faithful go on a pilgrimage to Mordheim, where they begin to celebrate the arrival of this great comet.
Do they know what a comet is? When you say like the arrival of a comet, I mean, when that comet arrives, it ain't stopping. It's going to make a big old crater when it arrives.
Oh, fucking spoiler, Kral. Jesus Christ.
Oh.
So anyway, given that nothing at all bad was going to happen, they had a huge party in Mordheim.
What could possibly happen? The comet's going to land gently on our planet. It'll come to a nice steady stop.
Unfortunately, as with all things in Warhammer, eventually chaos gets its little tendrils into the crowds, and the city descended into hedonism, or hedonism, depending on how you prefer to pronounce it. And more it was seen as a real kind of whatever the old world version of Sodom and Gomorrah is. It just descended into debauchery and other words that mean that elude me at the minute.
Why? Legit question. Why did people just go mental and liberal like that? Is that the effect it had on them? Or were they just like, let's party for no reason whatsoever?
There's really kind of two main reasons. The first being that chaos had begun to get its tendrils into some of the people that were there. And so if you're a very charismatic leader, charismatic orator, you're able to sway crowds. So, instead of worshipping Sigmar in a church or a tent, let's go and worship him in a pub or an orphanage. Will draw a veil.
Wow.
They got out of hand fast.
There's no middle ground.
No.
The second reason was the very nature of the comet itself. It was not a hunk of iron or ice or some combination of those traveling through space. It was, Jesus Christ, spoiler 2!
Crowley.
Shall I just finish this episode off?
I know. Well, I'll just hold my notes up to the camera and you can just keep going.
That's it. And then Nagash returned again. The end.
Fuck's sake! No. Quite correctly, you've guessed that the comet was in fact an enormous chunk of warpstone, and the twin tail was just a coincidence. This led the forces of chaos to kind of up the ante in terms of infecting the populace of Mordheim with this kind of hedonistic, devil-may-care, dilettante style attitude. But it wasn't just the warpstone alone, and this is really where it feeds into the wider Warhammer world, especially the forces of chaos. There was a being had hidden within the comet and had hidden to escape a curse that was placed on it by the very gods that it worshipped. What in fact had hidden in the comet was the very first demon prince, the very first human worshipper of chaos who became a demon prince, a being called Be'lakor, who was also known as the Shadow Lord.
You've mentioned him before. You've mentioned him in an early episode, yeah.
A very early episode. He was such a ambitious being that he wanted to be the de facto corporeal ruler of Warhammer World. He wanted to be the person in charge of all chaos, this side of the chaos portals. And feeling that he perhaps has gotten a bit too big for his boots, he was cursed by the gods of chaos, all four of them, to only ever be the one who places the crown of that leadership mantle on their chosen. So he went from being the one who wanted to be the chosen to being the one that has to eternally crown the chosen. And so he tries to escape that fate because it's humiliating, obviously, and thwarts all his attempts to be the greatest chaos being in the Warhammer world. And so every now and then he just says, fuck this for a game of toy soldiers, and hides and tries to escape that fate, tries to escape having to place the crown on a being's head.
Sounds quite childish to me, doesn't it?
Yeah. You wouldn't say that to his face. What had happened was he had sensed that the next great chaos champion would emerge in Mordheim. So this is a being that would either through invasion and conquering of Mordheim or would be born in Mordheim. It's someone who would eventually lead all the forces of chaos in Warhammer. So to avoid that, he threw his spirit into an enormous comet made of warpstone. He didn't manifest it, it was just traveling. So he bound himself in it. He possessed a rock of, a chunk of Dar. Tier 2 patrons only. Nice. He felt safe there. He had escaped his fate. But of course, the forces of chaos, being the forces of chaos, they began to guide.
Nuh-uh.
They were like, dude, we can see you.
Yeah. You know, like it's warpstone. It's literally made of us.
It's basically the equivalent of like hiding behind a curtain, and you just see his legs at the bottom.
Or just putting your hands over your eyes. I can't see you, so you can't see me.
So the comet eventually, as Kral correctly guessed, plummeted into the city of Mordheim, killing almost everyone. And it shattered into many shards, great word shards, and the largest chunk of it, the kind of core of it, which contained Be'lakor, came to rest in the center of the city. And very quickly, his kind of chaos magic-y spirit reached out to survivors within the city, and he presented himself as a being known as the Shadow Lord. Now, this Shadow Lord called or gathered a great force together, but really more like what was that movie? The Gangs of New York? Is that the name of the movie?
Depends what you're trying to remember.
yeah. It's the one with Darth Vader in it? No.
Use the Force, Harry.
So he created like a huge set of gangs referred to as the Cult of the Possessed. That's cult with an L, comprised of chaos cultists plus chaos spawn and mutated, humans mutated by the power of warpstone. And what he charged them with doing is to gather up as much of the warpstone shards as possible so that he would get more power, because obviously warpstone provides power. Interestingly, at this time, it wasn't referred to as warpstone. It was referred to as Wyrdstone, Wyrd.
Wired. You're doing it again with your pronunciations. It's pronounced Wyrdstone, Darren.
I will fucking potato you when you least expect it.
Come at me, brah.
And that impromptu hand job is completely off the table.
Oh, it's going to end up in mashed spuds, let me tell you. Or mashed spoods, I don't know. But of course, all this warpstone lying around in this imperial city drew the attention of other forces. At that time, so we're talking about the year 2000 in the imperial calendar, there is no emperor of the Empire of Man. It's all elector counts ruling over their separate provinces and really constantly at war trying to get to the throne. There were three main aspirants within the empire who had enough backing to be able to make a strong claim. These were the elector counts of Reichland, where Altdorf is, Middenland, where Middenheim is, and Marienburg, or Marienburg, which is the kind of Low Countries equivalent Amsterdam-y area in the wastelands off to the west of the empire. Their kind of mercenary groups descended because they figured, Warpstone is magic made manifest, and you can change your fate if you're lucky enough with Warpstone. So they wanted to gather as much of it as possible to power their magicians. Now, again, it's important to underline the fact that this is before the colleges of magic. So in the Empire, this is all pre-human understanding of the winds of magic and able to focus on a separate individual wind like Gur or Shamoon Motherfucker or Akshi or any of those.
Would the Empire in present day still have an interest in Warpstone? Would they still use it, or are they beyond that now?
They have an interest in terms of getting rid of it, securing it, getting it out of kind of general release.
It's like how we feel about coal. It's a fossil fuel, emits a lot of nastiness. Like back in the day, really useful industrial revolution. But now it's like, look, we've moved on to nuclear fusion now. Warpstone is old school. Nuclear fusion. You heard that, did you? Damn it.
Okay. Now what you do is you take some nuclear fusion fuel.
And you put in the spoople.
You need an amount about the size of a potato. So, yes, to answer your question, yes, there's still an interest. You still have errant mages who will try and get as much of it as possible. Really, you're looking at the Templars of Sigmar, the witch hunters. They're the ones that are going around trying to stop Warpstone being used, mostly by killing the people that would use it, but also by securing it or destroying it if they are able. Interestingly, together with the kind of mercenary groups from those three elector counts descending on Mordheim, you had witch hunters also. If not only because Warpstone, the knowledge and understanding of what Warpstone was has remained unchanged. It is still the same. So you're looking at people that know it's chaos made physically manifest and used by the forces of chaos and wizards. And witches were an equal opportunity killer of people. So you had witch hunters and flagellants really acting as the kind of I told you so crowd in Mordheim. Oh, you got all together and you had a big party. Oh, that's never going to end badly, is it? And then, bam, I told you so. And suddenly you've got a stake where a stake shouldn't be. You're impaled, you're on fire. One of the other kind of imperial institutions that actually survived the impact of the comet are called the Sisters of Sigmar, who are effectively, in 40k, there's the Sisters of Battle, which are kind of space nuns. These are the fantasy equivalent. So these are fantasy nuns. Please don't Google that term.
I'm Googling that term.
What are they called? The Sisters of Sigmar?
The Sisters of Sigmar. It's effectively female witch hunters, who like a monastic order of witch hunters.
/ great backing singers.
Yeah.
Googled fantasy nuns. It's actually more innocent than you'd think. Oh, apart from that one. Don't look at that one.
So their kind of abbey was shielded by a mystical force, probably Sigmar cupping his hands over it like a dome to stop the destruction. Ben, I can see the expression on your face. If you turn my cupped hands into anything other than an innocent protective gesture, I'll kick you right in the potatoes. And of course, wherever you find Warpstone, what do you find? That's right, Skaven, or Skavan. The Skaven sent in their gutter runners and night runner warriors of Clan. Anyone?
Eshin.
Yes! I'm so proud of my two boys.
Yeah.
Hang on a second. I've got to shout down to my son to improve. So the Skaven are in there now as well, getting as much of the Warpstone as they can and feeding it back into not only their own clan, but the Skaven Council to try and get, again, as much power as possible. So if you think of it like really Warpstone in this instance is a Duracell battery that powers influence. So there are lots of Duracell batteries green in tone around Mordheim. The last faction that really kind of was there in a big presence, and you'll be surprised now because it's not been a particularly vampire-heavy episode so far, are vampires. Specifically the von Carstien bloodline. Given the proximity of Mordheim to Sylvania, it's effectively on the border. The great Vlad von Carstien, Vashanesh of Handjob Denied fame, he desperately wants that Warpstone. Desperately. He has a big plan for it. So he sends in as many of the kind of lesser nobility as possible. If you understand vampirism, it goes from most powerful, who then creates his kind of immediate children, and then that kind of spreads down.
It's a pyramid scheme. It's just one big pyramid scheme.
Well, it goes down rather than up. So it's kind of really red, slippery waterfall of death. He sends in the minor nobles, like the knights and the kind of dukes and counts of, the evil miners into Mordheim. They bring with them, of course, necromancers, the wizards of the dead.
Of course, wouldn't leave home without one.
Don't leave home. Necromancers, as we now refer to them. But they also, it's actually, Mordheim itself is a game. This is where this kind of lore comes from. It was its own box game and arguably in the top 3 games that Games Workshop have ever produced. And in the kind of army list or force list for the forces of the undead, the vampires of the von Carstien bloodline, or you had these guys called dregs, which are effectively the Igors, to quote that, what was that movie? The Young Frankenstein? Stein? Oh, your name's Igor. No, it's Igor. The models are these kind of hunched figures, like hunchbacks and various other kind of obvious physical deformities associated with the stereotypical servant of evil. And
those were the lesser nobles, but nobles nonetheless.
No, those were the dregs who were the servants of the nobles. Yes,
right.
The noble, right. The vampires that went in, they are still noble, but not really above the kind of what's like an earl.
Are the dregs undead?
No, the dregs are human. They're the human servants. And really that embodies the kind of, here we go, Ben, the dichotomy of the Vampire Counts of Sylvania is that the vast majority of their forces are undead, but there are loyal human followers of the Elector Count of Sylvania. So the dregs then are those kinds of servants. They're the ones that are like the body snatchers. They'll go out there and grab the bits that a vampire needs to be able to conduct experiments and so forth. The vast majority of the Vampire Count forces in Mordheim were zombies, simply because there are so many dead bodies in Mordheim after the comet impacted that it was relatively straightforward to raise a lot of them. You also had ghouls, which we've discussed previously as the kind of devolved cannibals, and obviously they're attracted to the forces of death because that's what they eat. There's dead bodies everywhere. And then you had the dire wolves, which really we've not mentioned before, which are our own idea of what a fantasy dire wolf would be, a giant wolf, but it's dead. So it's a kind
so it's no threat.
yeah.
I mean,
I don't know why they included them in the game, if I'm being honest. It
just
seems like
flung at the enemy.
yeah, its movement is 0. It's useless. Yeah.
Attack 0.
What its special rule is wall. It's just a wall. So that was really the kind of main forces, the main combatants in Mordheim, all focused on getting the Warpstone out of Mordheim and into their own areas to be able to power either their desire to rule the Empire or worship chaos or. Mr. Chris.
So to recap, you've got Be'lakor and his chaosness going after Warpstone. You've got Skaven and their Skavenness going after Warpstone.
Yeah.
And then you've got the vampires and the undead all going after Warpstone. This big supermarket sweep style, smash and grab as much Warpstone as we can. Go, go, go.
And the witch hunters as kind of...
And the witch hunters and the battle nuns that want to destroy it, but also to protect the humans, and the mercenaries associated with the 3 big elector counts that were trying to get in there. Just as an aside, if you ever get a chance to play Mordheim, absolutely play it. It's a cracking game, both on tabletop and recently on computer. You can get it on Steam. It's a very good game. There are other forces in there that the undead had to face to be able to get the Warpstone out. So principally there was dwarf treasure hunters, there were orcs, greenskin forces in there, beast men were in there, obviously as an aside for chaos forces trying to get Warpstone. Mr. Chris.
Was it such a rush to get this Warpstone because it was just there to spread about all over Mordheim, basically, whereas normally it would be hidden in the heart of a mountain and you'd have to mine and do it. This was just there for the taking. It was just scattered all over the place.
It was a zero-sum game. If they didn't get it, then one of the other factions would get it.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. I think it was very much a gold rush, a Warpstone rush in there. So it had a very, what we would understand as a Wild West feel. There were no rules. You could, if you were strong enough to do something, you could do it. If you could deal with the consequences, you could do it. Mr. Ben.
Was Be'lakor the guy the demon who had the armor crushed by Khorne and then thrown?
No. That was. Hold on, shut up, Darren. That
started with B as well, didn't it?
No, it didn't. It was. I know this. Shush.
He doesn't know it.
Khorne, agent of Khorne.
Correct.
I think I was going to say Scaramanga, but that's.
Oh, that's so close! It's so close. Genuinely.
I know.
Scarbrand.
Scarbrand.
There you go. There you go. Well done.
Yes.
Well done. Yeah.
Amazing. Hand jobs all around. That's fantastic. That sounds like a really dodgy episode of Oprah. You get a hand job, and you get a hand job. So everyone look under your chairs. You'll never guess what's there.
So when all the people came to kind of celebrate in Mordheim, had Scarbrand in his Warpstone vessel?
No, you had Be'lakor.
Be'lakor.
What did I say? Scarbrand. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you get a veto hand job. Nope.
Yeah, no. I get an anti-hand job.
Which is a slap.
Doesn't mean that you give my auntie a hand job. But anyway, when he was in his Warpstone vessel, was he always heading towards Mordheim? And I'm trying to figure out, it's the kind of chicken and egg scenario. Was everybody celebrating in Mordheim because he was already heading to it and had said, that's where I want you all to go, so annihilate you with this comet? Or was everybody celebrating there and then he was just like, shit, there's a load of people down there, let's go and crash into there? Do you know which?
Just pulled a hard right.
Yeah, he just yanked on the Warpstone lever.
I mean, Be'lakor had no real control over the comet. He was hiding there. the force that pulled the comet towards Mordheim were the Chaos Gods.
Okay. So it wasn't heading towards Mordheim in the first place.
It was not. But it was them going, come here, you bollocks. You can't hide from us. And then, oh, look, we can destroy something. Look, all those faithful are there. Let's corrupt them and then destroy them. Because that's always good for a laugh.
Right, okay. Do we know where the comet just heading past the fated place originally?
Yes, it was just heading past it. Yeah.
Right, okay.
And really, that's one of the kind of key events of recent history within the Warhammer world. A lot of the things that happen later, you can trace back to that kind of era, with the empowerment of the Skaven, the eventual election of an emperor, and the great uprising, shall we say, of the Sylvanian forces, which is what we will deal with right now. So anyway, eventually the Warpstone, kind of the easy Warpstone reserves of Mordheim, were captured and drained away, which ultimately led to the destruction of the Shadow Lord's kind of hiding place, which will be covered in 2027 when we look at Chaos. But then effectively Mordheim became, for want of a better term, a ghost town. There were still riches there. There's still lore there. Their great library had a kind of a section on demonology and necromancy. It had like a restricted section.
But it was pushed right at the back.
Right at the back.
Behind
right at the back.
Closed curtains. Yeah.
Behind the velvet ropes you find at museums, the ones you dare not cross. So, yeah, there was still kind of ordinary treasures there. It was the largest city, or one of the largest cities in the Empire. So it had its own wealth and riches before Captain Comet arrived. It would stay a ghost town for nearly another 300 years, and ultimately its ruins were razed to the ground immediately after the Great War of Chaos by Magnus the Pious, who was determined to wash...
Well into pies, that guy.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm the piest.
So from the adventurous, kind of avaricious nature of von Carstein's interest in the Warpstone of Mordheim, why does he need it all, I hear you cry silently?
Why does he need it all?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. As a brief recap, about 200 years prior to the destruction of Mordheim, Vlad von Carstien took over Sylvania, took over the mantle of Elector Count by marrying into the von Drac family with his eternal wife Isabella. She then became quite poorly, stopped eating, only kind of was seen at night, was quite pale. You get the idea. And then slowly, a lot of the other nobility suffered the same disease. And despite their best efforts, none of the medics could cure them. And indeed, all of the medics were drained.
Did you call Isabella the eternal wife?
His eternal wife.
His eternal wife. That's a bit of a turn-off, isn't it? Like when you phrase it like that, like you are mine for all eternity. Ooh, yeah. Let's slow down a bit, love. Let's. Whoa.
Yeah, it's triggering my commitment phobia.
Your commitment phobia.
I'm like, whoa, Jesus Christ.
Yep. There is no get out clause here.
You mean I can't like die and exit this arrangement? Oh.
She sounds needy.
Wow, I've seriously misunderstood this situation.
I think in the future, when psychologists are listening to these episodes, they're going to have quite a bit to say about you two.
In the name of your rightful liege lord, Vlad von Carstien, Elector Count of Sylvania, you are ordered to march to war. Those who do so willingly may enroll their families in the Sylvanian State Child Care Program. Simply smear their face with your blood.
So obviously the curse of vampirism was being spread throughout the nobility of Sylvania. This then made Vlad, the possession of Sylvania, made him an elector count. So he had this desire to rule. He did not want to be the elector count of one province of the empire. He wished to be the emperor. He didn't want to be a vampire count. He wanted to be a vampire emperor because he felt that was his due. He therefore needed a force to be able to gain the throne. As you recall, this is a time when the emperor, there was no emperor for the Empire of Man. So he was just another claimant to the throne. 10 years after the destruction of Mordheim, he had accrued so much Warpstone that he was able to enact a shadowed form of the great ritual of Nagash.
Agash, agash, agash.
Oh, tingling on the tongue. Ooh, Nagash, Nagash, Nagash. So Vlad mounted the battlements of Drakenhof Castle, which is the kind of seat of power for the Sylvanian elector count. And having consumed and processed so much Warpstone, he was able to effectively read a version of the Great Ritual from one of the 9 books of Nagash. This power washed over the borders washed within the borders of Sylvania, effectively in an evening. Everything that was dead rose up out of the ground. So you had skeletons and zombies clawed their way out of the mud. The dead that were just lying by the side of the road got themselves up and looked at themselves in the mirror and decided they want to join a very forward-looking expansionist style empire.
Progressive, liberal, low taxes, yep.
Progressive, liberal, undead. The kind of hordes of ghouls emerged from their kind of crypts and dark places where they were gnawing on bones and flesh and maybe French fancies. Who knows?
When either von Carstien or Nagash or anyone casts the Great Ritual, do they have a choice of what and who they can revive? So you've got the undead humanoids and old kings and all these, all those people. What about like decomposed badgers to satisfy us, Ben? Or like, do you know what I mean? Like just dead fauna and bugs and stuff. Does everything and everything.
Is there like a list and they just
exactly.
They just tick the boxes of the ones they want and hit?
I'll have humans, I'll have that, I'll have don't like those. No, that's cool.
Yeah, the books of Nagash are very much the Mad Libs of magic. You just fill in the bits that you want. It's a great question. I think that the necromancers will they have to set a kind of boundary for the effect of the spell, mostly because none of them are as powerful as Nagash. Nagash's original version destroyed an entire kingdom the size of the Empire of Man, and he was then going to use the power of that, the power he gained from that, to expand that to cover the world. So lesser magicians can cover a specific area, a smaller area than that. I suspect the more powerful a necromancer is, the more types of being that they can summon. So the humanoid ones will be the most common. There are undead cavalry, which means there are undead horses, or animals of a similar size. There's the dire wolves that you can have, so they're animals of that size as well. And then you can have various forms of undead swarm. In the 3rd edition, you were able to assign swarms to your armies. So like lizardmen armies could have like snake swarms or jungle creature swarms. The undead armies could have undead versions of that, which effectively just cosmetic. It was the same stat. You could do things or the same things with them. But yes, I think that the more complete and powerful necromantic magic user is, the better they are able to refine what gets raised, how much of it gets raised, and within what boundary.
So undead badgers it is then.
Undead badgers it is then. So an important thing to kind of perhaps clarify at this stage is that there are very few vampires that are better than necromancers at necromantic magic. Necromantic magic, it's easier for necromancers to be powerful. Vampires not so much because they're dead. So necromancers have more finesse, shall we say, with necromantic magic in general. There are, of course, exceptions. The Necrarch bloodline is incredibly powerful at necromantic magic because their body is just infused with Dar, which is something that I find a little bit of a turn on. There are a handful of individual vampires for the various other bloodlines that are quite accomplished necromancers. But in general, necromancers are better at the necromantic undead arts than vampires, which is why vampires enslave quite so many necromancers.
So von Carstien, not being a necromancer, was he successful?
Yes, he was, because he had so much warpstone that he was able to transmute that into necromantic power. Almost all vampires have an affinity with necromantic magic. They're like level 1 magic users for necromancy, but very few get beyond that.
Unless you've got a buttload of warpstone.
Yeah, it's very difficult for an undead creature to process Dar at that level. So you now have effectively everything that ever existed in Sylvania stood up. Armies were formed, led by the various vampiric nobility, all under the kind of overall generalship of Vlad von Carstien.
One final question about this spell. Was he more successful in that sense than Nagash was? Did he actually manage to assert control over those characters that he reanimated? Unlike Nagash, who was defeated by Alcazar before he managed to complete the great spell. Von Carstien actually managed to, actually...
Yes, but albeit over a much, much smaller area, right?
Yes, and without the direct competition of any other faction. So there was no Skaven trying to disrupt the plan. Well, rather, maybe that's untrue. Any kind of disruption that could have been caused would have been on the supply of warpstone from Mordheim. Because Vlad, as with any great plan, it's best to keep your mouth closed while you're working on it. And that allows you to then have a better chance of success. Less people try and fuck with it in general. Yeah. I see Ben smiling ironically. Let's draw a bit. So his great army assembled. It goes on the march and it heads over the Steer River and heads up to Talabheim. So if you'll recall from our kind of brief gazetteer of the Old World, that's Talabheim is the province that has Talabheim is the city that's nestled in the crater of a meteorite. It's or comet, which is, if I recall correctly, based on an actual town in Germany, which is built within a crater, which is cool. I'd like to go there. As he's progressing through the Empire, he is just mincing everything. His entire force is very much like the White Walkers from Game of Thrones. There's no standing against it. As he comes to each settlement, as he comes to each town, he gives them a choice: serve him in life or serve him in death. Submit to his kind of authority as the nascent emperor of the Old World, or serve in his army as one of the undead soldiers. Almost everyone rejects his claim. You have to bear in mind that this is a time in the Empire where every 2-bit noble is claiming that they have the right to be an emperor. And unfortunately, for most of those people, Vlad has the power to back this up. So the army progresses forward and there's a great battle at a place called Essen Ford, where the Ostermark Elector Count, Attila III, great name, brings Vlad to battle. And it's a titanic clash. You have effectively the entire dead population of an imperial province, plus, I should mention, the living militia. Because he is their, rightful Elector Count, by marriage, he married into their Elector Count family, a lot of the living troops and living militia of Sylvania view him as their rightful lord, and so follow him. So there are living troops.
Jesus Christ, were they not like this guy here with his fucking spear standing next to me? He's dead. He's what the fuck? Did they not question it?
Democracy, mate. He was voted into leadership.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a multicultural society,
stop being such a bigot with the undeadisms.
I love all undead, Chris. Sometimes I dream of buying a farm and letting them all run.
Okay. Sorry to all our undead listeners out there.
Sounds a bit concentration campy, if you're being honest there, Ben.
I said run free.
Within these borders.
Run free away from my team of snipers. We'll give you a head start.
By blowing off your head. You have effectively an entire provinces or entire state army against another state army. So it's a real battle of living against the dead. You have, the dead as they progress forward are just being absolutely cut down by their hundreds by marksmen and cannons and mortars and other things that shoot things. But they're inevitable. It just keeps rolling forward like some sort of fleshy combine harvester. And as they get into the lines, they destroy and kill. And those enemy troops that are killed are raised up by Vlad's necromancers and indeed his own power. So it's really a recycling of the living into the dead into a new army. And so his army just continues to grow as it goes through. Ultimately, Vlad conquers the army of Ostermark, of Attila III, and he's true to his word. What he starts doing is he starts marching in all the living prisoners and killing them in front of their leaders, and then raising their bodies, which then march off to stand in line with the forces of Sylvania. It takes hours, and can you imagine being towards the back of the line, seeing all of this happening? You know what your fate is. You're going to be killed, and then your body will be raised. Your spirit will be imprisoned in like your fleshy coffin. You'll join the forces of the undead, and your kind of individuality will be bled away into the winds of magic.
I think you'd be horrified at first, but then you go through the motions. After hour 2, you kind of just accept it. Hour 4 or 5, you get a bit bored. You just kind of want the whole thing to be over and done with. Hour 7 or 8, you're quite excited. You're like, come on, bring it on. Let's kill me now.
Maybe go and take a break, grab a coffee, come back.
Yeah.
Like, I'm ready for this.
What I love is the idea of that. It's just, this is entirely the British attitude to queues.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't care what's at the other end. I have been waiting for 4 hours.
Just a lot of tutting and huffing.
What is the hold up?
Any queue this long's got to be good.
Yeah.
Hey, no cutting in.
Eventually, the leadership or the generals under Attila are driven insane as they're watching their troops, be definitely reassigned a new undead identity. And one of them, a chap called Hans Schliffen, a General Schliffen.
Fake name.
It's a great name.
Hans Schliffen.
I'm now worried I'm mispronouncing it, given all the pronunciation banter this episode. Schluffen?
It was actually John
Schliffen? Hans Schluffen?
John
Anyway,
Smith.
driven to, heights of just righteous indignation and rage, he leaps forward, grabbing the rune fang from the scabbard of Attila, and beheads Vlad in one swift motion.
Sorry, who did this? Van?
No, Hans Schliffen.
Hans Schliffen. Okay, yeah, right.
A general of the Empire.
And he did it on his own, so it was really Han Solo, wasn't it? I enjoyed that.
That's all that matters, buddy.
Yeah, so Hans Schliffen takes Vlad's head clean off, which then bounces around the place, and his body collapses. And then Hans Schliffen, Hans Schliffen, is then physically torn apart by Konrad von Carstien, which was one of Vlad's children, in quotes, one of the vampires Vlad himself created. But it left the army leaderless. So, as with all necromantic armies, when the general dies, the troops start to collapse. So the troops started to collapse while the vampires were trying to elect a new leader, trying to decide who would be the new general. Vlad had really kind of 5 immediate children, again in quotes, but there were other contenders. And eventually, a vampire called Herman Posner, a vampire called Herman, let's just reflect on that.
It's very Disney, isn't it?
Became the new Elector Count of Sylvania and general of the army. And while he was enjoying the newfound power of that role, Vlad just happened to walk back into the tent.
With his head.
It completely back together.
Turns out my head didn't fall off after all.
No, it turns out it did. Vlad walks back in. Herman is so shocked that it takes him a moment to begin to beg for forgiveness and beg for mercy from clearly a being who can master their own death, even though they are already dead. So Herman was immediately killed, destroyed by Vlad as a usurper and as an affront to Vlad's power and really for doubting Vlad's ability to master death. This then started a chain of death and resurrection of Vlad over the next few years.
What we'd like to call a nagash.
A nagash. He pulled a nagash. At the Battle of Schwarzhafen, he was killed by one of the Knights of the White Wolf, which are the Templars associated with the god of wolves and winter, Ulrich. So these are, if you can think of armored Templar knights who are also Vikings and have hammers instead of lances. Basically, stove in the head of Vlad. And he was killed by their Grand Master, Jarek Kruger. And so, again, that brought about a year of peace because Vlad didn't really, he was viewed as being properly dead this time. And then a year later, Kruger's bloodless body was found at the foot of the Mordheim spire. If you recall, Mordheim is the city on the kind of the mesa of rock in the middle of Middenland.
Sorry to interrupt. Before Vlad had his head caved in by this dude, did you say that Vlad had many episodes of dying and then coming back to life, dying and coming back to life? He did it several times, but then this time it seemed to take. Right, yeah, okay.
This then continued. So Mordheim effectively destroyed the Knights of the White Wolf and the Knights Panther, which are 2 Templar orders. Not completely, they still existed, but were shadows of their former selves, which were effectively destroyed by Vargeists, which are these winged monstrous vampires under a Vampire Count's control. This led the soldiers of the army of Mordheim to retreat into their kind of fortified mountain town. Seeing that kind of large, powerful imperial army served as a threat no longer, Vlad then just started mopping up as much of the empire as he could. Very much, if you recall, like the invasions of Greenskins, where they just basically hoover up land. So as he progresses, he destroys army after army and forces these great lords of the empire to hold up within their own cities, to hold up within their own towns. And then he mops up everything else. He's not really brought to bear he's not really brought to battle again until the kind of Battle of Bluthof. I think it's called Bluthof, where there was a charge of knights and Vlad fell to the ground, pierced by 5 lances and Ostlin's, the Count of Ostlin's rune fang straight through his heart.
Just for good measure.
It completely porcupined to death. So, but 3 days later, Vlad was up and about again, ordering the execution of prisoners outside the town. So, I don't even know if he changed his armor. Did he have the holes in his armor where the lances were? But his skin underneath was still, I suppose, leathery.
Yeah, they're like badges of what they call honor, aren't they? Yeah.
Badgers of honor.
Badgers of Honor. Now that is a TV show I would watch.
Yes.
An elite regiment of badgers are airdropped.
Tally
Behind
ho!
enemy lines to attack the ferret army.
Oh, I've now an even better. A follow-up series to that is the B team.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's the A team, but it's badgers.
Be a badger.
Badger Baracus.
Hannibal.
So as the kind of campaign against the northern provinces of the Empire concludes, he has effectively destroyed every army sent against him. And so decides to head south and make for Reichland, which is one of the great, he's dispensed with the army of Middenheim. So Middenheim can't really hire elector counts or vie for the imperial throne anymore. He's now heading to Reichland to try and get rid of that aspirant for the throne so that Vlad's own claim can be legitimate and the most powerful. As he's heading over, he's at a place called Bogenhafen, which is quite famous in Warhammer lore because it's one of the very first RPG supplements is Shadows over Bogenhafen. And it appears in almost all Warhammer Fantasy computer games have a mission or a battle at Bogenhafen where you kind of combat the undead. He's unlucky when he crosses the bridge because Cannonball takes his head clean off.
What a shot.
What a shot. But unfortunately, an hour later, the cannon crew are dead. Yep.
Inflates his head again.
Do you think because his head's gone, he sticks it down the stump of his neck or up his arse and tries to fart and his head just pops back?
I think he's like a turtle. Like people keep trying to cut his head off.
Yeah.
He just disappears down into his shoulders and neck. Two things. One, I picture Vlad just kind of waltzing across this bridge mid-dialogue. He's monologuing, talking about how almighty he is.
Yeah.
And then out of nowhere, cannonball right into his temple. And everyone's just quiet, like, Vlad? You all right? And, okay, second thing, aim for somewhere else. How many times do you have to cut his head off, stove his head in, shoot his head off with the cannonball for him to come back, for you to realise that, look, his power ain't in his head.
Yeah.
Or his life
Yeah,
force.
his weak point is his knee.
Yeah, or his toenail or something. It ain't his head.
What I love is the idea is that maybe he is just turtling his head down. Everyone in all his vampire kind of children know he is, but they're just humouring him.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, yeah, no, what are we going to do? Vlad's dead again.
Like a child.
No.
You just hear him going, hee hee hee. Anyway, it's serious. It's horror. He's horrible. Eventually, he makes his way to Altdorf, the capital of Reichland. Oh, sorry, yes. He's back within 3 hours and kills the cannon crew.
Of course he
and
is.
their drained bodies are found splayed across the cannons. This war has now been going on for 40 years. And so he eventually decides, right, I'm going to go for it. And he lays siege to Altdorf, which, as we all recall, is the capital of the empire. He arrives to find that the city is just been fortified like it has never been fortified before. There are rows of ditches.
Oh no, ditches. What are they going to do?
Well, they've filled them with wooden spikes.
Oh, okay.
And so it creates an area of, shall we say, difficult ground for vampires. But they've also, in the largest trench they dug, they've redirected the River Reich so that it has a moat. The city now has a moat of incredibly incredibly fast-flowing deep water.
It's very fast water, but kind of floppy.
Yeah.
Flaccid.
It's flaccid water.
Fast water.
Is that the opposite of ice water? And so they begin a protracted siege at Altdorf. The von Carsteins begin creating enormous battle engines, catapults, badgerpults maybe, towers, other things. What are other amusing war engine examples?
The War Glockenspiel.
A war Glockenspiel, that would do it. And they just start a barrage of physical and magical missiles against the town of, or the city of Altdorf. as we had discussed within the Dwarven episodes, most human cities, the walls around them were built with the assistance of dwarves. So there's a magical resistance kind of pre-baked into the stones. So it really began to become a stalemate when Vlad announces again. He reminds everyone that they can serve him in life or serve him in death. So as this barrage is continuing, and as Vlad delivers once again his ultimatum to the populace of the Empire, the claimant to the throne, the amazingly called Ludwig, Elector Count Ludwig of Reichland, is actually going to surrender. He's decided he can't put his people through this, he can't put humans through this anymore. So if he capitulates, Vlad will be merciful, and thus life will continue on for most people. Some people will be turned into some sort of Stroganoff. Other people will be infected with the vampiric curse and thus will live forever. So some level of value of the empire will continue. However, the Grand Theogenist, who is the High Priest of Sigmar, convinces him otherwise and insists that they have to defy Vlad in all his forms and all his words against all kind of threats and hold true to Sigmar. So Wilhelm, the Theogenist, decides that he needs to seek answers in prayer. And so he prays for 3 days within the great temple of Sigmar in the center of Altdorf. And at the end of that 3 days, he is granted prophetic visions and ideas of salvation. The doors to the temple are flung open, and he immediately goes in search of a thief within the city of Altdorf, a chap called Felix Mann, and charges him with a specific mission. The thief creeps out of Altdorf and uses all his skill to get past the lines of skeletons and zombies and other undead creatures, badgers, unicorns, maybe crickets. Do you think undead crickets exist? And, this is happening in the cold light of day. So you can imagine how horrific the scene and indeed the smell must have been as you're creeping through ranks of the rotting and undead. And he steals his way into the actual kind of general's tent of Vlad von Carstien, where Vlad is sleeping in an open coffin next to his wife Isabella, next to the various other kind of generals of his army, including his kind of two main children, Conrad and Manfred.
Sorry, he's caught them at nap time. Like the leader of all vampires, his wife, all his generals and lieutenants. It's just nap time. Like, yeah, look, 1 o'clock every day for everybody. It's nap time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mid-battle.
I don't know if you're particularly... I don't know if you're particularly familiar with vampiric lore,
sure,
Kral, but they tend to not do anything during the day. They tend to be asleep. The correct word is torpor. But as he steals into the tent of the napping undead, and it is odd.
Yeah.
Especially given that they've also got human troops. This is a load of shit. What are we talking about? He gets in, and while there is some mild disturbance, probably snoring, who can say, he manages to very gently steal an ornate ring from Vlad's finger and then disappears from history. He's never heard of again. It's unclear if he returns to Altdorf or if he simply just wanders out into the wider old world. Upon waking, Vlad instantly recognizes that his ring is gone, and it is in fact the power of this ring that continues to resurrect Vlad. And without the ring, he is now, for want of a better word, mortal. He's absolutely incensed and immediately orders a huge attack, a full frontal, possible nudity attack on the city of Altdorf. everything in the undead army seems to instantly switch on at once. Regiments immediately start moving forward. Siege towers are wheeled forward. Some pushed, some probably of their own volition on little kind of undead hands like the Thing. And the barrages begin once again. You see that the skeleton swordsmen and indeed the powerful wights of the Drakenhof Guard, which are the elite undead unit of Sylvania, are on the battlements, and they're just
raining hell
on each other. Thank you. I got tongue-tied there for a second. It is a nightmare siege, and what you see are undead forces versus living forces, particularly the heroes. You see great imperial heroes armed with magical weapons going up against the kind of vampire nobility, who kill the imperial heroes, who are then in turn killed by other imperial heroes. And at the center of this huge struggle, you find the kind of great grand theogonist of Sigmar comes face to face with Vlad himself. And there is a titanic combat, very reminiscent of when Sigmar was fighting Nagash. So you have the hammer of...
Galmaraz.
No, it wasn't using...
Not Galmaraz.
Not Galmaraz. Another holy hammer against the magical darting...
They've got loads of them.
Yeah.
They've got fucking loads of those holy hammers, yeah.
To be honest, they take them for granted. There's so many of them. It's familiarity breeds contempt. That's what it is, yeah.
Holding open doors and, yeah.
Yeah. But ultimately, over the hours, Vlad was gaining the upper hand because he's a vampire. He's dead. He doesn't get tired. Whereas the human theogonist was...
he naps. I think you'll find they fucking nap. They do get tired.
Let me just say, I sit corrected.
Undoing.
But to... what the Grand Theogonist has is conviction rather than kind of any desire or ambition for power. So he basically bum rushes Vlad and casts both Vlad and himself over the battlements of the walls of Altdorf to be impaled on one of the spikes below. So Vlad's body falls directly onto the stake, the giant spike, and then Wilhelm's body lands on top of it, driving it either further down.
And they're face to face.
And they're face to face. As Wilhelm expires, he laughs, and then Vlad, hearing that laugh, dies permanently, is gone. And very much, I was just thinking back to when the last word a chap heard was potato. But just gone.
That's the last thing he said to him. Potato.
It's pronounced potato, you fucking twat.
Or Wilhelm, when he passed, went, all power to Sigmar.
So quite an epic death. They never, they never like have these like awkward, embarrassing deaths, do they? Like, fucking, I don't know,
No.
They fall into this pit of mud and get trodden on and like their head gets squished. No, they get impaled epically on this big stake and a one-liner comes out and it's all very epic. You know what I mean? But
with the death of Vlad, the true death of Vlad, the army starts to collapse, except for a specific radius of undead, centered upon a necromancer or a vampire. The kind of larger general army collapses.
Rededified.
Isabella, his wife, sensing that her husband is dead and seeing the destruction of the army around them, realizes that...
Actually, I'm not your wife for eternity after all. Turns out you're dead.
I'm free! Yeah. And obviously then, suffering an acute case of Stockholm syndrome, she simply impales herself on a stake and crumbles to dust. She could not face
an eternity of life without her
any
mother.
future without him. Yeah.
She's a proper bunny border, isn't she? She's... What a hot mess, Isabella. Jesus Christ.
She does this before the Elector Count Ludwig and his bodyguard, who would have pressed on, who would have run the undead forces and the vampires and necromancers into the ground to end it all once and for all. But there were literally only a handful of human soldiers left. their entire force had been spent stopping the undead armies. And of course, then, as with all things human, politics came into play. If he spent any more of his force getting rid of the undead from within Reichland, it would weaken his power to be able to challenge other claimants to the imperial throne. And so in the darkness of night, the vampires slinked away, and the power of Sylvania kind of once again bidded its time so as to be able to make another attempt to conquer the world. And of course, with their main leader gone, they were factionalized. You had various kind of as a dark mirror of the empire. You now had a number of claimants to the Elector Count throne of Sylvania.
And they're like, right, new law. No nap times.
No nap times.
We're stopping nap
Nap time
times.
cancelled.
Yeah.
If we're napping, the lids have to be closed, and locked from the inside.
Yeah. No more powerful rings.
Yeah.
If you have a ring, it goes on a chain around your neck when you're sleeping.
Yeah.
In a locked coffin. But I think that's where we'll draw a veil for this episode before we get into what I like to refer to as the Second Vampire War.
What a wild ride.
So I have a question about the two stories that you've just told. Was the reason that the von Carsteins went to Mordheim to secure the Warpstone because Vlad von Carstien had used up all the Warpstone in raising the dead in Sylvania and needed to replenish his supplies? Is that why they went?
I think in broad strokes, yes. He hadn't used up all the Warpstone in Sylvania, which suffers from the occasional Warpstone shower. It's just there was an opportunity to get so much more Warpstone that he would be able to enact a version of the Great Ritual. So yes, that is why the von Carstein bloodline sent so many agents to Mordheim to be able to gather up additional Warpstone to power Vlad's bid for world domination.
And then he did that ritual.
And then he came very close, I would almost say Nagash close, to conquering the area he wished to conquer.
Where was Sigmar at this point in time?
Sigmar had been ascended for about 1,950 years.
Oh, fucking. He's way dead. Yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool.
He did.
Yeah.
He ascended. If anyone wants to read a much more coherent and understandable version of the First Vampire War, or indeed the Second or Third Vampire War, spoilers, there are a series of novels which are still available. They're still in print by the Black Library, called the Von Carstien Trilogy, written by an author who is enormously underrated, Stephen Saville. I mean, it's an unfortunate last name, but there you go. He's an absolutely fantastic writer. I can't recommend those books enough. Really, really good.
And of no relation to the other Savile that you know.
Yeah, Andrew Saville. What a cunt.
That was awesome. I loved that.
Yeah,
Right.
man, brilliant.
Should we wrap up?
Yeah.
All right, that's all from us. Thank you so much for listening. Details and imagery for the topics we've discussed in this podcast can be found on our website at layingdownthelore.com. And we also have all our previous episodes on there, release schedules, merchandise, and you can sign up for the Laying Down the Lore newsletter, which includes exclusive info about upcoming releases, behind-the-scenes chat, and some extra lore not covered in the podcast. As always, a big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. We couldn't do this without you guys. You cover our costs and allow us more time planning content. If you're not part of this merry band, you've enjoyed what you've heard in this episode and want to support us, head over to patreon.com/layingdownthelore and sign up today for as little as £3. This will give you access to our Discord server so you can come and chat with us directly, and there's an ever-growing pile of exclusive bonus content on there. We'll be back again next month displaying just how little Chris and I know. Until then, goodbye.
Ta-ra.
Sleep with one eye open.